"License and registration, now," the officer barked, slamming his flashlight against the tinted driver's side window. The glass trembled under the impact, but the man inside didn't flinch. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles tightening slightly under the dim streetlight. "Sir, I just moved here," the man replied calmly, his voice deep but even, carrying the weight of someone who had been trained for patience. "I don't know what the problem is, but there's no need for—" The officer cut him off with a pounding knock of his flashlight, harder this time. "Don't get smart with me. Step out of the car." From across the quiet suburban street, porch lights flicked on. Curious neighbors peeked through blinds, some whispering, others watching in silence. The night air was thick, heavy with tension, the kind that makes a person's chest tighten without even realizing why. Welcome to Black Community Stories. Make sure you like and subscribe for your top-notch stories about prejudice and racism towards blacks. The man behind the wheel wasn't just any father driving home after unpacking boxes in a new house. He had a resume that could silence entire rooms. But right now, none of that mattered. To the officer with his jaw clenched and his hand on the butt of his gun, all he saw was a black man in a sleek car parked in the wrong neighborhood. "Step out," the officer shouted again, his voice sharp enough to make the dog down the street start barking. The man inhaled slowly, his eyes moving briefly to the rearview mirror where two frightened faces peered back at him. His teenage son and daughter, frozen in the back seat. Their mother, seated beside him, pressed a hand on his arm, whispering, "Please just do what he says." The officer circled the car like a wolf, his boots crunching against the gravel. He paused near the back bumper, shining his light inside, scanning the faces. He sneered when his beam caught the wife's expensive necklace, then moved to the son gripping a basketball bag. "What's in the bag, huh? Drugs? Guns?" The teenager shook his head rapidly. "It's just a ball, sir," he stammered. But the officer wasn't listening. He tapped the glass hard again, leaning close, his breath fogging up the window. "Last warning. Step out, or I'll drag you out." Inside the car, the man's jaw set tight. He wasn't a rookie at handling pressure. Years in government service had taught him how to remain calm, even in the face of aggression. But now he was calculating, weighing the risk of compliance against the danger of escalation. He knew his kids were watching. He knew his wife's grip on his arm wasn't just fear. It was begging him not to turn this into something that could scar their family forever. The neighbors' whispers grew louder. A door creaked open. A voice across the street muttered, "That's the new family that moved in today, right?" The officer yanked at the door handle, but it was locked. His temper flared, and with a grunt, he smashed the flashlight against the glass. A web of cracks spread instantly across the window. The teenage daughter gasped, covering her mouth. "Sir," the man finally raised his voice, controlled but firm. "There is absolutely no reason for this. I haven't broken any law." The officer leaned closer, his face twisted with irritation. "The law is what I say it is tonight. Get out." The father's pulse hammered in his ears, but outwardly he remained composed. He knew this was no ordinary traffic stop. This was personal. It was racial. And it was spiraling. His instincts told him to reveal who he was, to drop the truth that would freeze the officer mid-breath. But another instinct, stronger, told him this wasn't the moment. Not yet. Behind him, his children clutched each other. His wife squeezed his arm harder, whispering, Don't let them take you from us. The man's chest rose and fell as he made his choice. He slowly reached for the window controls, his eyes locked on the officer, his lips pressed into a line of pure defiance and discipline. The officer shifted his stance, ready, impatient, itching for control. The night was only beginning. Before we dive in deeply, let us know in the comments what country or which city you're watching this story from. We'd love to know how far this story travels. The window buzzed as it rolled down halfway, the cracked glass groaning under the pressure. The officer bent lower, his flashlight beam flooding the man's face. He paused for a fraction of a second, surprised, maybe, because the man didn't look rattled like most drivers did when cornered. His eyes were steady, unwavering, the look of someone used to standing toe-to-toe with hostility. "Now, both hands out where I can see them," the officer ordered. His voice carried across the still night, echoing down the street. The man obliged slowly, raising his hands through the broken opening. His palms were steady, though inside his chest his heart drummed like a warning bell. He could feel his children's eyes burning into him from the back seat. They weren't just watching a father. They were watching how a black man survives in America when the wrong person has a badge. "I told you," the man said calmly. "We just moved here today. I have paperwork in the glove box, my ID, my wife's ID. Everything checks out." The officer smirked, pressing the flashlight so close it nearly touched the man's nose. "Yeah, that's what they all say. You think moving into this neighborhood makes you untouchable? You think that fancy car means you belong here?" The wife leaned forward, her voice trembling. "Officer, please, he hasn't done anything wrong. We're just coming from the store." "Quiet," the cop barked, the sudden roar making her recoil into her seat. "One more word and I'll have you out too." A hush fell again, broken only by the distant hum of crickets. A couple across the street had stepped onto their porch now, arms folded, whispering. One of them raised a phone, uncertain whether to record or stay hidden in fear. The officer banged the door again with his flashlight. "Out! Now!" The man inhaled, then carefully unlocked the door. His movements were deliberate, calculated, the kind that came from training, every motion meant to diffuse tension, even as it piled higher. He stepped out slowly, the night air rushing against his face. He stood tall, shoulders back, meeting the officer's glare with quiet strength. He was taller than the cop expected, not towering, but solid, the kind of presence that makes people think twice. But the officer wasn't thinking. He was itching to prove control. "Hands on the hood," the officer snapped. The man's eyes flickered toward his children, who were pressed against the window, their small faces etched with terror. He turned back slowly and placed his hands flat on the hood of his own car, the metal cool under his palms. The officer moved behind him, one hand resting on his holster, the other patting aggressively at his sides. "What you got on you, huh? Drugs? A weapon?" "No," the man said calmly. "You won't find anything." But calm only seemed to enrage the cop further. He shoved harder, forcing the man's chest against the hood. The kids began crying now, their muffled sobs filling the car. The mother turned, banging her fists on the window. "Stop it! He hasn't done anything!" The officer turned sharply, pointing at her. "Lady, you better shut her up before I call backup. You don't want to see what happens when more of us show up." The man lifted his head slightly, speaking low but firm. "You're scaring my children. That's enough." The officer chuckled coldly. "Scaring them? Good. Maybe they'll learn early how this works. Gasps rose from the neighbors. Some whispered, "Too far." But none stepped forward. The man's patience was thinning, but his training kept his temper buried under layers of control. He could reveal the truth. He could end this standoff in a single sentence. But he didn't. Instead, he stayed quiet, letting the cop dig himself deeper. The officer, frustrated by the lack of resistance, raised his baton and slammed it down across the cracked window he had already damaged. This time the glass shattered completely, pieces raining inside onto the screaming kids. The son pulled his sister into his arms, trying to shield her. That was the moment the man's calm broke, not with rage, but with a shift in his stance. His head turned slowly toward the officer, his eyes dark, intense, unflinching. The street seemed to grow still. Even the officer paused, uneasy under the weight of that look. But the silence didn't last. A distant siren wailed in the background, faint, but growing louder, cutting through the night. The officer smirked again. "Backup's on the way. Let's see how tough you are when more of us get here." The man said nothing. His silence spoke louder than words. The night wasn't done yet. The red and blue lights sliced through the darkness as another patrol car screeched to a stop behind them. The flashing beams painted the quiet neighborhood in chaos, reflecting off windows, cars, and the cracked windshield of the man's vehicle. Two more officers stepped out, hands already resting on their holsters. The original officer straightened, his face smug with reinforcements arriving. "Right here, boys," he said, motioning toward the black man pinned against the hood. "Got ourselves a real suspicious character. Won't cooperate." The man's wife clutched her phone tightly inside the car. Her hands trembled as she whispered to herself, "Should I call someone? Should I?" She wanted to dial 911, but who would she be calling? More of the same uniforms already standing in front of her. Her son, voice cracking, said, "Mom, he didn't do anything. Why are they doing this?" She pulled him close, unable to answer. The new officers fanned out, one shining his flashlight directly into the man's eyes, the other circling towards the passenger side, peering inside the car. "How many of you are in here?" he barked. "4," the wife answered softly, though her voice shook. "My husband, myself, and our 2 children. That's all." The first officer, chest puffed, waved toward the broken glass on the ground. "See that? Non-compliant, resisted, might be armed." The man turned his head slowly, speaking for the first time since the backup arrived. "That's a lie, and you know it." His tone was measured, deliberate, the kind of voice that made people listen even when they didn't want to. One of the backup officers frowned, looking from the shattered window to the trembling kids inside. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him, but his partner sneered. "Doesn't matter. Get him cuffed before he does something stupid." The first officer grinned, pulling his cuffs free. "Gladly." He yanked the man's arm back, metal clinking. But before the cuffs could lock, the man turned his head again, his eyes steady, his voice sharp enough to cut through the night. "You're making a mistake." The officer froze briefly, the words hanging heavy in the air. He tightened the cuffs anyway. "The only mistake here was you thinking you could stroll into this neighborhood without answering to us." Inside the car, the wife's chest rose and fell rapidly, panic clawing at her throat. She finally unlocked her phone and opened her contacts. Her thumb hovered over a number, the one person she knew could fix this in seconds. But doubt clouded her. Would it escalate things if she called? Would it put her husband in even more danger? "Officer," the neighbor across the street finally shouted, phone in hand. "I'm recording all of this. We saw what happened. He didn't resist you." The first officer snapped his head around. "Go back inside before I cite you for interfering." But the man being cuffed didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stood straighter, his voice calm but chilling. "Let them record. You're the one writing your own report tonight." The officer's smirk faltered for the first time. The sound of the siren had grown louder, closer, but now it cut off. Another car had arrived, this one different. No flashing lights this time, just the crunch of tires against gravel as a black SUV rolled slowly to a stop at the corner. Its headlights washed over the scene, and for a brief second, everyone turned to look. The man's wife's eyes widened. She recognized the vehicle instantly. Relief flickered across her face, but she didn't say a word. She gripped her children tighter, whispering, "Hold on. Just hold on." The first officer didn't notice the SUV. He was too focused on his prize, shoving the man harder against the hood, satisfied with the control he thought he held. "Yeah, you'll learn your place real quick around here," he muttered. The man said nothing this time, but in his silence there was power, a storm brewing just beneath the surface, hidden behind eyes that never wavered. The SUV door opened slowly, a shadow stepping out, tall and deliberate. The weight of authority seemed to follow the figure, though the officers at the scene hadn't yet realized what kind of authority it was. The night air shifted. Something was about to change. The SUV door shut with a solid thud, echoing across the street. Every eye turned as a tall figure walked into the glow of the streetlights. His stride was calm, steady, unhurried, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made the neighbors whisper. The officers barely glanced at him. To them, he was just another onlooker, maybe a homeowner curious about the flashing lights. The first officer sneered, waving him off. "Sir, step back. This is police business." The man at the hood didn't move his head, but his eyes tracked the figure as he approached. Recognition flashed in them, subtle but sharp. His wife noticed too, clutching her children tighter. She mouthed something under her breath, but the words were swallowed by the tension. The figure stopped a few feet away, his voice calm but firm. "What's happening here?" The officer with the cuffs jerked his chin toward the man pinned against the car. "Suspicious driver, non-compliant, possible threat." The figure studied the scene, the shattered glass, the terrified children, the man's hands locked against the hood. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked directly at the officer, his gaze so steady that it made the cop shift uneasily on his feet. "I see a family," the figure finally said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, slicing through the silence like a blade. "Not a threat." The officer bristled, his ego prickling at the challenge. "Sir, like I said, this is police business. Step back, or I'll have you removed." The figure tilted his head slightly, unbothered. "Removed? Interesting choice of words." The neighbors leaned closer, sensing something different now. The air was changing, the power dynamic wobbling in a way the cops didn't seem to understand. Inside the car, the wife whispered to her children, "Don't move, don't make a sound." Her eyes stayed locked on the shadowy figure, her grip trembling but hopeful. The first officer yanked harder on the cuffs, trying to drag the man fully upright. "Enough of this. We're taking him in." That was when the man finally spoke again, his voice low but cutting. "You're making the mistake of your career." The officer laughed, though it sounded forced. "You think I'm scared of you?" Silence fell like a hammer. The man's words lingered in the air, unsettling, powerful, and the figure from the SUV stepped closer, his expression unreadable. The backup officers exchanged quick glances, sensing something off but unwilling to question their colleague just yet. The neighbor with the phone shouted again, louder this time. "We're recording everything. You can't hide this." The officer spun, barking, "I said go inside." But the crowd was growing now. More porches lit up, more faces appeared behind curtains, and more phones were raised. What had started as one officer and one driver was becoming a scene the whole block would remember. The man at the hood lifted his head just slightly, his eyes burning with quiet authority. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't begging. He was waiting. The figure from the SUV moved closer still, now just a few feet away. He looked directly at the first officer, then at the cuffs biting into the man's wrists. His words came slow, deliberate, and heavy with meaning. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" The officer scoffed, puffing out his chest. "Don't care. Doesn't matter. He's just another suspect who thought he could outsmart me." The figure's eyes narrowed, and the weight of his silence pressed down on everyone present. The man's wife bit her lip so hard it nearly bled, her heart pounding as she realized what was coming. Her children held on to her tighter, sensing the storm, but not yet understanding it. The street was no longer quiet. It buzzed with whispers, tension, and the restless shifting of people who knew something big was about to unfold. The first officer straightened, baton in hand, eager to finish what he started. But the look in the man's eyes told a different story, a story the officer wasn't ready to hear. The night was reaching its breaking point. The officer's baton hovered in the air, ready to strike, but before it could come down, the figure from the SUV stepped forward, his voice slicing through the chaos. "Enough." It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced even the neighbors' whispers. The officers froze, the first one turning with irritation. "Who the hell do you think you are? You don't tell me how to do my job." The figure didn't blink. "That's exactly what I do." Confusion rippled through the gathered crowd. The man at the hood slowly lifted his head, a faint, knowing look crossing his face. His wife's grip on the children loosened as relief flickered in her eyes. She whispered, "It's over." The first officer laughed bitterly, mistaking the tension for a challenge. "Oh, really? And what authority do you think you have over me?" The figure reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open. The gold badge inside gleamed under the streetlight, the letters bold, undeniable. Federal Bureau of Investigation Director. The officer's smirk evaporated. His mouth fell open, his baton slipping slightly in his grip. The other two officers stepped back instinctively, their hands falling away from their holsters. The neighbors gasped in unison. The figure's voice hardened. "You just smashed the car window of the newly appointed director of the FBI. You threatened his family. You humiliated him in front of his children, and you did it all because you saw the color of his skin." The street went dead silent. The man, still cuffed against the hood, finally turned his head toward the first officer. His calm had never wavered, but now his voice carried a chilling edge. "I gave you every chance to stop, every chance to do the right thing. and you kept digging." The officer stammered, his confidence draining. I didn't know. I thought." "You thought wrong," the director cut in sharply. "And tonight, everyone here saw it." He gestured toward the neighbors with their phones raised. "There's no undoing this." The wife finally opened the car door, rushing to her husband's side. Her hands trembled as she touched his arm, relief washing over her face as the figure from the SUV nodded to one of the backup officers. "Unlock him, now!" The cuffs clicked open, and the man stood tall, shaking the stiffness from his wrists. He didn't shout, he didn't gloat, he simply looked the officer dead in the eye. "You didn't just target a black man tonight. You targeted the wrong black man." The officer swallowed hard, his face pale under the flashing lights. He stumbled for words, but none came. The crowd's whispers grew louder, the sound of recording phones capturing every second. The director of the FBI turned toward his shaken wife and children, wrapping his arms around them briefly, grounding them in the storm. Then he faced the officers once more. "This isn't over. Internal Affairs will hear about this before sunrise, and so will Washington." The officer's knees nearly buckled. He had gone from predator to prey in the span of minutes, and the realization crushed him. The neighbors stayed silent, recording, watching. The night that had begun as just another display of prejudice had transformed into something unforgettable. A revelation that power, respect, and justice wear many faces, and sometimes the man you look down on is the very one who holds your future in his hands. The director gave the officer one last cold look before leading his family back toward their car, shards of glass crunching beneath their feet. The SUV door opened again, waiting for them, ready to take them away from the wreckage of a night that none on that street would ever forget. The officer stood frozen, his career flashing before his eyes, knowing the mistake he had made was permanent. The night had ended, but the story was only beginning. The end. Please like and subscribe for more rich stories like this. Comment below. Also, if you really loved this video and want to support the channel directly, you can hit that super thanks button below.